Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Nous sommes ici ce matin pour annoncer les prochaines étapes de notre plan visant à freiner la propagation de la COVID-19 et à assurer une relance économique solide. Depuis le début, notre gouvernement s'est engagé à faire tout ce qu'il faut pour aider les Canadiens et les Canadiennes et à traverser cette crise. Nous avons fait beaucoup de chemin
We have covered a lot of ground
19 derniers
over the
mois.
past 19
Les
months.
scientifiques ont accompli
Scientists
un travail
have carried out
incroyable
incredible
pour
work
mettre au point et fabriquer
to
des
create
vaccins
and
contre la
replicate
COVID-19.
vaccines against COVID-19.
Canada is fortunate to have enough doses of COVID-19 vaccines for every eligible Canadian to be fully vaccinated. And the vast majority of Canadians have stepped up and done the right thing. Around 89% of eligible Canadians have received one vaccine dose, and around 82% of eligible Canadians have received both. So please, if you haven't received your shots yet, please do so as soon as you can. And if you have any questions about the vaccines, please talk to your trusted healthcare provider. The evidence is absolutely clear that vaccines are safe. They prevent the spread of COVID-19. They significantly reduce the severity of cases. And most importantly, they save lives. They also allow our businesses and workplaces and schools to reopen and to stay open. Our absolutely strongest and most important economic policy continues to be a strong public health response, and that very much includes making sure all eligible Canadians get vaccinated. That is how we avoid further entirely preventable lockdowns. To fight COVID-19, our government has taken historically unprecedented action. We shut down our economy and we closed our borders. To support Canadians and Canadian businesses in this unprecedented fight, we have invested over $289 billion to provide income and business support. That is a lot of money, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. Now, we have a tool that will allow us to finish the fight against COVID, to keep our economy open, to keep our kids in school, and to let all Canadians get back to work. Vaccines. We absolutely must use this tool, and we will. So today, we are announcing 2 strong new mandatory vaccine measures. Let me start with the first. Federal public servants in the core public administration must be fully vaccinated by October 29th. This will apply to those who work in the federal government's various departments, the RCMP, Correctional Services of Canada, the Canada Border Services Agency, and many other offices and agencies. We are taking this step to protect those who work in the federal public service, their families, and their communities. This measure also protects everyone who does business with the public service, whether it is getting access to your benefits at a Service Canada office or safely traveling across our borders. Members of the public service who are not fully vaccinated or do not disclose their vaccination status by October 29th will be placed on administrative leave without pay as early as November 15th. Aujourd'hui, nous annonçons 2 nouvelles mesures
Today,
de
we are announcing 2 new mandatory vaccine measures. Firstly, federal public servants in the core public administration must be fully vaccinated by October 29th.
Sauf exception très limitée.
with very limited exceptions. These measures will apply to those who work in the federal government's various departments, the RCMP, Correctional Services of Canada, Canada Border Services Agency, and many other offices and agencies. We are doing this to protect those who work in the federal public service, their families, and their communities. Members of the public service who are not fully vaccinated or who do not disclose their vaccination status by October 28th will be placed on administrative leave without pay as early as November 15th.
We are also directing Crown corporations and agencies to implement policies that mirror those we are announcing today. The Chief of Defense Staff will issue a directive mandating vaccination for the Canadian Armed Forces. And we are working with employers in federally regulated workplaces. Les sociétés et organismes d'État devront aussi
We are also directing Crown corporations and agencies to implement policies that mirror those we're announcing today.
Le chef d'État-major
The Chief of Defense Staff will also issue a directive mandating vaccination for the Canadian Armed Forces.
Et nous collaborons avec
we are
les
working with
employeurs
employers
des autres milieux
in
de travail
federally
sous
regulated
règlement fédéral
workplaces
pour faire en sorte que la
to
vaccination
ensure
soit
that
une
vaccination
priorité.
is a priority.
En tant que principal employeur
As
du
the
pays,
number one employer
nous
in the
voulons
country,
nous assurer
we want
que
to
le
ensure that the
gouvernement
government
du
of Canada
montre
sets an
l'exemple
example
et met en
and
place
establishes
une
a
politique
vaccination
de vaccination
policy
qui assure la sécurité
that protects
des gens.
everyone's safety.
Notre gouvernement a d'ailleurs
Furthermore,
été
our
réélu
government was
pour mettre en
re-elected
œuvre
to implement
cette
this
initiative.
key initiative.
We also know that some parts of Canada are today facing a very difficult fourth wave of the virus. And there are sectors of the economy that continue to struggle. These responsible, practical, and tough actions we are announcing today will protect Canadians, prevent our healthcare systems from being overwhelmed, allow our children to continue to go to school, accelerate our economic recovery, and give businesses, including those in the hardest hit sectors, confidence that our strong economy is less vulnerable to COVID-19 related further lockdowns. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very
And let
much.
me now pass it over to the Prime Minister to talk about other measures that we're announcing today. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Chrystia. Comme Chrystia l'a dit, on a fait beaucoup de
As
chemin
Chrystia
dans notre lutte
said,
contre la
we
COVID-19.
have covered a lot of
Avec des millions
ground
de gens
against
pleinement vaccinés, le Canada est un leader mondial
with
de
millions
la
of people fully
vaccination. Mais
vaccinated.
notre
Canada
lutte
is a
n'est pas
world
terminée.
leader on vaccination,
Depuis
but
le
our
mois
fight
d'août,
is not
on
over.
travaille pour mettre en place
Since
des
August,
mesures
we have
de
been working to
vaccination
implement
qui vont
vaccination
assurer votre
measures that will
sécurité
ensure your
et
safety
celle de votre
and the
famille.
safety of your
Ces
family.
mesures vont aussi vous
These
permettre
measures
de
will also allow
reprendre vos
you to
activités
resume
préférées.
your favorite activities.
Aujourd'hui, on
Today,
remplit
we
deux
are
de nos
fulfilling
principaux
two of our
engagements.
main
La
commitments.
vaccination
Mandatory
obligatoire pour les employés
vaccination for federal
fédéraux et
employees
la vaccination
and
obligatoire
mandatory
pour les voyages.
vaccination for travel.
Chrystia has outlined what the mandatory vaccination that's in place immediately for federal employees will look like. The bottom line, proof of vaccination will be required by no later than the end of this month for all federal employees. And by mid-November, enforcement measures in place will make sure that everyone is vaccinated. This is about keeping people safe on the job and in their communities. And the same goes for the second commitment we made, mandatory vaccination on travel. By the end of October, everyone 12 or older on a plane or train within Canada should be fully vaccinated. There will be a short period where people who are in the process of getting vaccinated can show a negative COVID-19 test, but by the end of November, if you're 12 or older and want to fly or take the train, you'll have to be fully vaccinated, as will staff. Testing will no longer be an option before boarding. À la fin du mois d'octobre, toute personne
By the end
âgée
of
de 12 ans
October,
ou
everyone
plus
12 or
voyageant à bord d'un
older
avion ou d'un
traveling
train
on a
devrait
plane or
être
train within
entièrement
Canada
vacciné.
will have to be fully
Pendant une
vaccinated.
courte période,
There will
on
be
va
a short
permettre aux gens qui
period
sont
where
en
people who are in
processus
the
de
process of
vaccination
getting
de montrer
vaccinated
un
can
résultat
show
de
a
test de
negative
dépistage négatif.
COVID-19
Mais à la
test.
fin du mois de novembre,
But by
vous
the end
devez
of
être
November,
entièrement vacciné,
you'll have
tout
to be
comme les
fully
membres du personnel.
vaccinated, as
Et
will
le test
staff.
de dépistage
And
ne sera plus
testing
une
will
option.
no longer be an option before boarding.
If you've done the right thing and gotten vaccinated, you deserve the freedom to be safe from COVID-19, to have your kids safe from COVID, to get back to the things you love. And if you haven't gotten your shots yet but want to travel this winter, let's be clear. There will only be a few extremely narrow exceptions, like a valid medical condition. For the vast majority of people, the rules are very simple. To travel, you've got to be vaccinated. These travel measures, along with mandatory vaccination for federal employees, are some of the strongest in the world. Because when it comes to keeping you and your family safe, when it comes to avoiding lockdowns for everyone, this is no time for half measures. Already, we're delivering on the first of our vaccine commitments, and in the weeks to come, we'll get the job done on a vaccine passport for international travel. We'll be there to foot the bill for provinces and territories that roll out proof of vaccination programs, and we'll introduce legislation to make it a criminal offense to threaten or harass healthcare workers.
Canadians have put our government back to work to get through this pandemic and move on to better days. We will do the work on vaccination. We will make life more affordable for the middle class. We will take ambitious climate action while creating good green jobs. And we will move forward on the path to reconciliation. A lot of work awaits us. That's why later this month, we will swear in a new cabinet to implement our progressive plan. I'm very excited about everything that we can accomplish together.
Before I take questions from the media, I want to address the issue of last week. Traveling on September 30th was a mistake, and I regret it. The first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation was a time for Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people alike to reflect and connect, think about the past, but also focus on the future. I want to thank Chief Casimir of the Kamloops for the conversation we had over the weekend, in which I apologized for not being there with her and her community for this important day. And I committed to going to visit the Kamloops Teswekmuk community in the coming weeks. There's a lot of work for us all to do, and I'm committed to doing it. Merci. Je suis heureux de prendre vos questions.
Thank you. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We'll go to the room for questions. Ashley Burke.
Hi, Prime Minister. Ashley Burke, CBC News. What made you decide to take a personal trip to Tofino on a day that your government set aside to honor the victims and survivors of residential schools?
Like I said, it was a mistake to travel on that day. This is an important moment for Canada and for Canadians to reflect not just on the past, but on the present. I was in error to choose to travel on that day, and I apologize directly to Chief Casimir for not having attended the event that she invited me to, which is why I'm looking forward to going to the community and sitting down with them in the coming weeks.
As I said, it was a mistake to choose to travel on that day, on September 30th, and I regret it. It was an important moment for Canadians to reflect on reconciliation. I'm happy that I was able to speak with Chief Casimir of Kamloops to offer my apologies and to commit to visiting the community in the coming weeks.
But why did you do it? And did anyone advise you not to do it?
I think the how it happened is far less important than that it happened, which I regret. And we will continue to do even more on the path of reconciliation, whether it's continuing to eliminate long-term boil water advisories, whether it's making sure that there's better investments in housing and support for kids going to new and better schools across the country and Indigenous communities. There's much work to do, and I am committed to doing it.
Hi, Prime Minister. Mercedes Stevenson, Global News. This question is for both you and for Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland as well. Last night, the military announced that they were removing Major General Peter Dawe from his position in providing a review of external reports into sexual misconduct in the military judicial system. This was a decision that was greeted with horror by victims of military sexual misconduct, the original decision to appoint Major General Dawe to that position. There's a feeling that senior leadership in the military is not getting it months into this. Ultimately, the military reports to the civilian authority. So first, your reaction to General Dawe's appointment and then unappointment, and also when will your government take action to address this externally?
I think, first of all, like so many Canadians, I was stunned and dismayed to see the media reports about this particular role. It is obvious that despite the work that the military has done, despite the work that we've done, the military still doesn't get that survivors need to be at the center and the unique priority of everything in regards to sexual misconduct and harassment in the military. And this shows they simply still don't get it. We have an awful lot of work to do. We know that, which is why we've brought in people like Justice Louise Arbour to look at how we completely transform the military culture and the way our Canadian Armed Forces operate. But this is, again, a reminder of just how much work there is to do before people understand within our armed forces that survivors need to be at the center of everything they do. Honnêtement, j'ai été stupéfait.
Honestly, I was
de
shocked
voir les nouvelles
to see the news
qui racontaient cette nouvelle position et
about the new position
ces responsabilités.
and responsibilities
Ça démontre pour
of this
moi que
individual.
malgré
It demonstrates
les efforts,
that
et il y en
despite
a eu
the efforts, and there
au
have
sein
been
des forces
efforts
armées,
within the
ils ne
Canadian Armed
comprennent encore
Forces,
pas
they still don't
que
understand
c'est les survivants, les
that
survivantes qui
survivors
doivent être au
must be at the
centre
heart
de toutes
of
leurs actions.
all of their
En termes
actions
de ressources, en termes
on
d'écoute, en termes
resources,
d'apprentissage.
listening, and learning.
Et c'est évident que c'est
And
pas
it's
encore le cas.
obvious that
Il y a
they're not
beaucoup
there
de travail
yet.
à
There's a
faire.
lot of work to be
Nous,
done.
évidemment, on va faire notre part.
We
C'est pour ça
obviously
qu'on a,
will do our share,
demandé à la
and
justice
that is why we asked
d'être
Justice
impliquée dans
Arbour to be
cette
involved
question-là
in
et de
the
faire des
matter
recommandations
and
sur
to make
comment on va
recommendations on
transformer
how
non
we will
seulement
transform
les structures
not
à
only the
l'intérieur des forces
interior
armées,
structures
mais
of the Canadian
la
Armed
culture
Forces, but
profonde
also
qui,
the deep
malgré
culture which,
tout le
despite
travail
all of the work
que les médias, que les Canadiens
that
s'attendent
the
à ce que
media and
soit fait,
Canadians expect,
que moi je m'attends à
that
ce que soit
I
fait,
expect,
ça n'a pas été fait encore.
despite all this, has not been done yet.
Yeah, thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Mercedes. And thank you for your dogged pursuit of this story. Look, I actually want to start by saying to Canadians, but also directly to people in the military, that I really recognize the incredibly hard work people in the Canadian Armed Forces do every day and how much we all rely on them. And I thought of that a lot in the spring of 2020 when we relied on the Canadian Armed Forces as a final line of protection and defense for our seniors in Quebec and Ontario. And I'm thinking about it now as someone who is so worried about Alberta. I think you probably are too, Mercedes. And knowing that the Canadian Armed Forces is there is so important. So I do want that work not to be overshadowed, and I want to say to all the people doing that work, we recognize it. Thank you very, very much. But I also think your question was exactly right. And you said, Mercedes, that it seems as if the leadership just doesn't get it. And I think that's true. I think the reality is there is a systemic problem with the treatment of women, the treatment of sexual harassment in the Canadian Armed Forces. It is clear that there is a toxic culture there. And it is clear to our government, as the Prime Minister said, that that needs to change. And it will. It's not fair to everyone, but especially to the really brave Canadian women in uniform who go to work and serve every day. And like every single woman in Canada, they should not have to work in a place where they face this kind of a culture and treatment.
As a follow-up, what kind of person do you think you're looking for the next defense minister? A lot of people don't think that Minister Sajjan should stay on, given the number of things that have happened under his tenure as defense minister, and last night's reversal just being one of the many. So I don't expect you're going to tell us who the defense minister is, but what are some of the characteristics you're looking for in that next defense minister?
As you know, we will be naming our cabinet later this month. And the reflection that goes into every single job in cabinet is who is the right person to serve Canadians, who is the right person to fulfill the high expectations that Canadians across the country have for this government in all of our priority areas. And I can assure you that there is serious reflection going into every single role in cabinet.
Sir, you made vaccine mandates a central part of the campaign. Can you explain in this policy why you feel an attestation is good enough as opposed to demanding proof of vaccination, which is currently policy at restaurants in Ottawa, just a few blocks from here?
The attestation for the public service is the first step with severe consequences for anyone who is found to have been misrepresenting themselves in that attestation. And we are putting in place significant processes to ensure that those attestations are, in fact, real. But I will turn to Minister Freeland on that.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the policy is, as of October 29th, if you want to work for the Government of Canada, which means the people of Canada, you have to be fully vaccinated. The Canadian public service is vast. We are Canada's biggest employer, and so a system needs to be put in place to verify each person's status. We're starting with an attestation so that we can have a hard deadline of October 29th. The reason that there is that period until November 15th before the action of someone being put on unpaid leave is taken is to give managers time to be sure that each case is dealt with correctly. But I also want to say one thing which I think can get lost in some of the coverage of this. And that is the vast majority of Canadians are doing the right thing. And I think as Canadians, we have to remember our country is doing remarkably well, both when it comes to having the vaccines available so people can get vaccinated, but even more importantly, the vast majority of Canadians across the country are doing the right thing, are getting vaccinated. 89% with at least one shot. That is fantastic. And I really want us collectively to bear in mind, this is about the majority doing the right thing, and it is about government taking action on behalf of that majority who spoke in the election to be sure that a minority of people cannot sabotage Canada's economic recovery and cannot allow the fourth wave or other variants to cause real problems for us all.
In the tech briefing, we were told that the audits would be designed by the individual government departments. Can you tell us how rigorous you expect those audits to be? And are you prepared, as we've seen in other jurisdictions, to potentially lose thousands of public servants over this policy?
It's very straightforward. If you want to continue to work for the public service of Canada, you're going to need to be fully vaccinated. And the way to ensure that happens as quickly as possible is to allow for the vast majority of Canadians and public servants who are vaccinated to make a simple, straightforward attestation to the reality of their vaccination status. That allows managers and departments to focus in on those people who will not. Anyone who lies on their attestation will face severe consequences, and there will be verifications done over the following weeks to ensure that everyone is vaccinated. But this is about recognizing what so many public servants and Canadians have already done, which is getting vaccinated in order to keep themselves and their colleagues and their fellow citizens in their communities safe. And that is what we recognize with this particular approach. Nous reconnaissons que c'est
We
important
recognize that it's important
que quiconque travaille pour
that anyone who
la
works
fonction publique
for
fédérale
the federal
soit
public
vacciné.
service be vaccinated.
Heureusement,
Happily,
plus de 80%
over
des Canadiens et de
80%
la
of
fonction publique
Canadians,
sont déjà
and including the public service,
vaccinés
are
et
already
donc une
vaccinated.
attestation
And so an
où ils vont
attestation
déclarer leur
where they
statut
declare
d'être
their
vacciné.
vaccination
C'est la
status
façon la plus rapide
is
et la
the
plus
fastest
facile d'aller de
easiest
l'avant
way to
pour
move forward
reconnaître que
to
la vaste
recognize
majorité
that
des
the
gens
vast
ont fait la bonne
majority of
chose.
Canadians have done the right
Mais
thing.
nous allons avoir des
But
processus en place
we will
qui
have
vont
processes
varier de
established that will vary from one
département
department to the next
selon les circonstances
based on their own
pour
circumstances
faire une vérification
to
et
conduct an
quiconque aurait
audit,
menti sur
and
cette
anyone who has
attestation
lied on their
va avoir
attestation
des sévères
will
des
face
conséquences sévères,
severe
mais
consequences.
aussi ça va
But
nous
also,
permettre
it will
d'assurer
allow us to ensure
on est en
that
train de continuer de
we
livrer
are
pas
continuing
seulement
to deliver
les services et le travail
not
sur
only
lesquels
these
les Canadiens
services
dépendent,
and work that
mais aussi
Canadians depend on,
montrer
but
l'exemple aux
also setting an
Canadiens
example
d'une
to
fonction
Canadians
publique qui est en train
of
de
a
protéger les Canadiens
public
de toutes les
service that
différentes
is
façons.
protecting Canadians in many ways.
Which is vaccine mandates work. There are people in the country who just, haven't gotten around to getting vaccinated. Maybe they have some worries, sort of inchoate, amorphous concerns, and for whom having a practical reason why you need to get vaccinated is enough of a nudge to have them take this action. And actually, just last week when the Prime Minister and I were at a vaccination clinic here in Ottawa, we talked to one gentleman who told us about how his daughter had been bugging him to get vaccinated. He sort of wasn't sure he wanted to do it, but the fact that the mandates were in place and he now needed to be vaccinated to go to a restaurant, he just said, okay, what the heck? And he let his daughter drive him to the clinic that day. I think we should not discount the number of Canadians who are in that position. And these mandates are going to push us to a high enough degree of vaccination that our economy can continue to be open, our kids can continue to go to school.
Bonjour, Joël Denis Bellavance de la presse. Monsieur Trudeau,
Bellavance
il y a un
from
débat
La
qui fait
Presse.
rage à savoir est-ce qu'on
Mr.
devrait permettre
Trudeau,
les députés
we're
de
wondering whether
faire leur entrée à la Chambre des
MPs
communes
should be
sans
allowed
être
to return to the
vaccinés.
House of
Avec
Commons
la
without
mesure
being
que vous
vaccinated.
présentez
With the
aujourd'hui,
measures
ça
that
veut
you're
donc dire qu'un
presenting
député,
today,
je donne
are
un
you saying that, well, an
exemple, un député
MP,
conservateur de
for
l'Alberta
example,
ne
a
pourrait plus
Conservative
prendre
MP from
l'avion
Alberta could no
pour
longer
venir à la Chambre des
fly
communes à
to
partir
come
de
to the
la fin
House of
octobre. C'est bien
Commons
ça?
by the end of October? Is that what you're saying?
Oui,
Yes.
avec des mandats pour vaccination, de
With
vaccination.
vaccine mandates,
Quiconque veut embarquer
anyone
dans
who
un
wants
avion,
to fly on a
dans les
plane
prochains mois va
in the
devoir
coming
être
months
pleinement vacciné.
will have to be
C'est
fully
des
vaccinated.
mesures pour protéger
It is one of the
les
measures we are
Canadiens, c'est des
taking to
mesures
protect
pour
Canadians.
protéger les enfants
There are
qui
measures to
voyagent sur des
protect
avions qui
children
n'ont pas
flying on
encore
planes who do
la
not
capacité
yet
de se faire
have
vacciner.
access to
Et c'est une
vaccines.
reconnaissance que
And it is a
il y a plus de
recognition
80%
that
des Canadiens
over
qui ont fait
80%
la
of
bonne
Canadians
chose.
have
On
done
en a
the right
discuté
thing.
longuement
We have
pendant
discussed this
cette
at
élection.
length during the election,
Et les Canadiens ont
and
été clairs qu'ils
Canadians were
s'attendent à ce
clear
que
that
tout le
they
monde fasse sa part
expect
pour se
everyone to
protéger
do their
et
part
protéger les
to
autres.
protect
J'ai une
themselves and
question,
others.
Madame Freeland. Est-ce que vous avez
Follow-up
l'intention
question,
de
Ms.
présenter
Freeland,
une mise à
do
jour
you
économique et
plan to
financière
table
cet
a
automne,
financial and economic
ou est-ce que
update
vous avez
this
l'intention
fall,
d'attendre
or
au budget
will
fédéral
you
pour
wait for
présenter
the
le
federal
dernier décompte
budget
du déficit et
to
des dépenses du
give an
gouvernement
update
fédéral?
on the government deficit and spending? Excellent question. We are I'm currently discussing that with the Prime Minister.
Oui, bonjour, Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada.
Monsieur Trudeau, dans
Question.
les règles qui sont présentées
Mr.
aujourd'hui,
Trudeau,
il y a
in
des
the rules
exemptions
presented today, there
J'aimerais
are
savoir
religious
quelle
exemptions. I would like to know
interdit la
which
vaccination.
religion bans
C'est une très, très bonne
vaccination.
question. Et ce que je veux
Answer.
dire
That's a very good question.
d'abord, c'est que
What I'd like to
les
say first of all
exceptions, que
is
ce
that
soit
the
des
exceptions, whether they
exceptions
are
médicales ou
medical
autres,
or
vont
other
être
exceptions, will be extremely limited
et difficiles à
and
obtenir.
difficult to obtain.
On sait que
We
il y a
know
beaucoup de
that
gens qui
there
sont,
are many people
hésitants, qui
who
sont
are vaccine hesitant,
résistants.
who are
Ce
vaccine
sera
resistant.
pas, une conviction personnelle
It will not be
qui
out
va
of
être assez. Ça va
personal
vraiment
conviction that they will
prendre,
be issued.
des
It will
exemples
really
concrets.
take
Nous sommes en
concrete
train justement
examples.
de
We
travailler,
are working
la fonction publique
within
avec,
the federal public
le Santé
service
Canada
with
par
Health
rapport
Canada
aux exemptions
on
médicaux,
medical
mais
exemptions,
aussi
but also
médicales, mais aussi avec d'autres partenaires
we are working with
pour,
other partners
les autres exemptions. Mais je
for
peux
other
dire que ça va
exemptions.
être,
But I can tell you
extrêmement
that
difficile et
it will be very
rare,
difficult and
d'avoir,
rare
des
to
exemptions à
obtain an
ce programme
exemption
parce
to
que,
this
on
program
le
because
sait,
we
c'est par la
know
vaccination
that
qu'on
it's
va en
through
finir avec cette
vaccination
pandémie
that we
et
will get
protéger
through
les
this
Canadiens et
pandemic
protéger notre
and
économie.
protect Canadians and our economy.
Let me say from the start that the intent of these measures is to ensure that anyone working for the federal public service, that anyone wishing to travel on a plane or a train, be vaccinated. And exemptions, whether they're medical exemptions or otherwise, will be exceedingly narrow, specific, and, to be honest, somewhat onerous to obtain. The goal is to make sure that everyone who can chooses to get vaccinated. We will, of course, work with, as we are with Health Canada, on defining those medical exemptions, on other partners, on other exemptions. But let me say that simply having a personal conviction that vaccines are bad will not be nearly enough to qualify for an exemption to that.
Et pour les gestionnaires, ça va pas
And
être
for
évident de dire, ben
managers,
lui,
it
par
won't be
exemple, la
obvious to
religion
say,
l'empêche
well,
vraiment de se faire
his
vacciner,
religion
lui, ça ne
really
l'empêche
prevents him
pas.
from being
Qu'est-ce que vous dites aux
vaccinated
gens qui
and
croient
this other
que,
person
finalement,
no?
vous laissez aux gestionnaires la
Why
tâche de trancher, la
are
tâche difficile de
you
trancher, et que vous lavez
allowing
un peu les mains,
managers to be the
Non,
ones
au
to decide?
contraire, les
Answer, no, on the
directives que nous
contrary. The
allons,
directives
partager dans les
that we
semaines à
will share in the
venir,
coming
bien avant
weeks,
la date butoir de fin
well
octobre,
before the deadline
vont
of
être
end of
extrêmement
October,
claires
will be
sur
extremely clear
quelles seront
on
les exemptions acceptées. Mais je
the
peux vous dire
accepted
qu'il va pas en avoir
exemptions,
beaucoup.
but I
Ça
can
va
tell
être
you now there won't be very
extrêmement
many. It will
difficile à
be
obtenir
very
et
difficult
c'est
to
une
obtain,
responsabilité que
and
le
it is a
gouvernement
responsibility that the
va
government
prendre d'être
will
extrêmement clair
take
là-dessus
to be
pour que
very
ce soit
clear
pas
on the matter
du
so
cas
that
par cas
it
par
is
les
not on a
opérateurs
case-by-case
aériens ou par,
basis
des
by
gestionnaires
airline
dans différents
operators or
départements.
managers in various departments.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau, Olivier Ferrand-Boissé de TVA.
Good morning,
Je veux revenir
TVA.
sur Tofino.
I'd
Pourquoi
like to come
avoir
back to
menti sur
Tofino.
l'itinéraire et quel
Why did
message
you
ça envoie?
lie on the itinerary? What message is
Il y a
being
eu aucun
sent?
mensonge là-dedans.
Answer, there
Vous
was
dites que
no
vous étiez à
lie.
Ottawa?
It was said you
Non,
were in Ottawa.
l'itinéraire disait
No,
que
the
j'avais
itinerary
des
said
rencontres
that I
privées,
had private
effectivement.
meetings
J'ai eu des
and
appels
I had calls
pendant des heures cette journée-là
for a number
avec
of
des
hours that
survivants
day
des,
with survivors
des pensionnats autochtones.
of Indian residential schools.
Dans ce cas-là,
In that
je me demandais
case,
aussi quelle
I
responsabilité
would like
vous
to know
prenez dans
what
le fait
responsibility do you
qu'au
take
terme
for
de
the
cette
fact
première
that
journée-là
at the
nationale
end
de
of this first
réconciliation,
National Day
on ait
of
parlé
Truth and
plus de vous
Reconciliation,
que de
you were talked
réconciliation.
about more than reconciliation?
Évidemment,
Answer.
dans mon discours le soir
Obviously,
avant
in
pour
my
lancer
speech
cette
the night
journée
before to
ici
launch
sur
the National
la
Day for
colline
Truth and
parlementaire, j'ai parlé
Reconciliation on the Hill,
du besoin
I
de
spoke
nous
about
tous
the need for
de se pencher,
all of us,
autochtones et non autochtones, sur ce qui s'est passé
Indigenous
dans les
and
pensionnats
non-Indigenous,
autochtones et notre
to focus
responsabilité
on what happened in
de
Indian residential schools
comprendre la
and
vérité du
to
passé,
understand the truths of the
mais
past,
d'être présent
but also
pour
to
la
be
guérison et de
present for
bâtir
healing
mieux pour
and
le
to build
futur.
better for the
C'était aussi ce
future.
que j'ai entendu
That's also what I
des
heard
survivants
from
auxquels j'ai
survivors
parlé pendant la journée.
who I spoke to throughout
Nous
the day.
avons tous du travail à faire
We all
et
have work to
je
do.
prends
And
tout à fait ma responsabilité
I
de faire
assume my
mieux dans l'avenir.
responsibility to do better in the future.
Glenn McGregor, CTV News. Prime Minister, by the end of the month, it's going to be up to gate agents at airports to scan people's proof of vaccination visually. And they have, of course, a patchwork of different systems right across the country because your government has failed to produce a national standard. When are you going to create an app that can be used right across the country that people will be able to show show their proof of vaccination?
A couple of things on that, Glenn. First of all, as you know, it is the provinces, as the deliverers of medical services, who have the information on citizens as to who is vaccinated, who is not, and with how many doses of what. The federal government doesn't have that information, and quite frankly, for privacy reasons, are happy to not have that information, which is why we are working with provinces across the country on proofs of vaccination, and we are working to standardize them so that they are available to people to travel internationally in a unified format that will allow for that. So we know that the work that we're doing right now with provinces across the country on proofs of vaccination will be beneficial for restaurants and gyms, but also will help for international and domestic travel. In regards to the gate agents, I can tell you that the work that we're doing with the major carriers in this country is to integrate the proof of vaccination digital codes into their online booking process so that when you print out your boarding pass, either at the airport or in advance, there will be a clearly marked proof of vaccination thumbs up or check mark so that the gate agent does not have to be checking documentation. That's part of the work we're doing with the air carrier. We know that the more than 80% of Canadians who've done the right thing, who've gotten themselves vaccinated, who have the proof of vaccinations from their provinces, don't deserve to be slowed down in their desire to travel and face more onerous tasks. And that's why we're ensuring that will work as smoothly as possible.
Okay, so when is this going to come? You say you're working with the provinces. In Europe, since the spring, they've had a standardized digital vaccine passport that's multinational, as well as proof of vaccinations within those subnational governments within those countries. If Europe can do it with much larger number of people and more jurisdictions, why can't you do it here with 10 provinces?
But we are doing it, Glenn. We have this smart health card format that has been adopted in California, New York, multiple other states, I think 20, 25 other states, as well as most of the jurisdictions across this country that are moving forward in a unified format that will allow for people to have that proof of vaccination. As we said, this is an extra responsibility that the provinces need to step up on, which is why the federal government will be footing the bill for the development of those proof of vaccination certificates. We are looking forward to having all provinces be on board with this to make sure that their citizens have the opportunities to travel, to get back to the things they love doing as quickly as possible once they've done what over 80% of Canadians have done already, which is getting vaccinated.
Hello, I'm Mike Blanchfield, Canadian Press. Prime Minister and, of course, Deputy Prime Minister as well, if you'd like to weigh in. Are you going to make it a requirement, or what are your thoughts on having MPs in the House of Commons fully vaccinated and everyone who works in that building, including political staff and not just public servants?
I have been clear that every single MP for the Liberal Party needs to be fully vaccinated. All of our candidates needed to be fully vaccinated with one limited medical exception for one of our candidates. Most of the other parties have done exactly the same because we recognize that it's the way to get through this. It's the way to lead by example. It's the way to ensure that Canadians do the right thing. Everyone who works for the federal government, who works within the parliamentary precinct, will be required to be vaccinated. MPs, because of issues of parliamentary privilege, will have to figure out how to move forward. I know discussions are engaged with, and let's be direct about it, members of the Conservative Party of Canada who have not been unequivocal on vaccinations. We know that all other MPs in this House will be vaccinated. So it is something for Erin O'Toole and the Conservative Party to deal with. That they will have MPs not able to get on planes to come to Ottawa if they are unvaccinated. They will have MPs putting their fellow colleagues at risk in a large but closed windowless room in the House of Commons who may be sitting beside or near someone who is unvaccinated. This is a serious issue that the Conservative Party of Canada is going to need to grapple with. We will, of course, engage in as constructive a way as possible, but Canadians expect us both to lead by example and not be vectors of transmission to each other or to people working in the public service.
I agree with what the Prime Minister has said. And, you know, look, I think we really need to, all of us who have been through an election, Canadians have made a choice. I certainly found just myself personally campaigning. And, you know, I campaigned across country from the Pacific Coast to the Atlantic Coast. I knocked on a lot of doors with our candidates. And in my own experience, there were two issues people cared about the most. One was childcare, and I feel we have really a clear mandate to get the job done. But the most important thing that I heard from people is they wanted us to finish the fight against COVID, and there was very strong support for vaccine mandates. I think it's so important to emphasize the vast majority of Canadians have themselves gotten vaccinated, and they want to put this behind us. They are aware of really the miracle of vaccines that allows us to do that. And I really believe they elected a government to go ahead and do that. And I would say to every single MP who was elected, no matter what party, your constituents, your neighbors put a lot of trust in you. The majority of your neighbors are vaccinated. And really now is the time to just sort of take a deep breath and say, let's do the right thing for Canadians. Let's do the right thing for the economy. We've spent $289 billion and counting on income support and business support. This has been a national trauma and a very, very expensive national trauma. And at this point, we all know there's a tool we can use to end it. Members of Parliament have the single greatest personal responsibility to act, and we're calling on them to do that.
Thank you. And we have time for one more question.
Murad Hamadi, The Logic. Minister Freeland, the 2021 budget states that Canada's upcoming digital services tax will apply, quote, until an acceptable multilateral approach comes into effect. What does the government consider to be coming into effect? Is that Friday when you're supposed to announce an OECD deal? Is it when the global minimum tax takes effect? Is it when the Pillar 1 redistribution takes effect? What does what takes effect mean?
Okay, that is an excellent question. And as you know, our government has been devoting a lot of energy, as have governments around the world, to working on the OECD level deal that would bring in two pillars of international taxation. There was a G7 finance ministers meeting just last Wednesday, and I have over the past 2 and a half weeks, had conversations with Janet Yellen, Rishi Sunak, Olaf Scholz, Bruno Le Maire, and Daniela Franco, as well as Matthias Cormann, the Director General of the OECD. So that's just to give you a sense of how intensively Canada is engaged in this issue. That is a plane that is still in the air. We haven't landed it yet, so I'm not going to speculate right now on details of where the plane will land. But I will say that Canada has been clear about two things in our fall economic statement last year, in our budget this spring. First of all, to our commitment to working very, very hard for a multilateral agreement. That agreement will be really good for Canada's bottom line. It will prevent the current international race to the bottom on corporate taxation and will ensure that the world's biggest companies pay taxes where they do business. So this is a really important deal. Canada is very, very committed to doing it, and we're working hard on it right now. Number two, we have also said, because people have been working on this deal for a really long time, that absent a deal, we're committed to going ahead with a DST. That's why we announced that commitment in the fall economic statement last year. In the budget in the spring, we included it in our fiscal framework. So those are our two commitments, and we're working really, really hard with our international partners.
You just mentioned the amount of money the government has spent to prop up the economy during the pandemic. The wage and rent subsidies expired this month. Will you extend them?
You want to? So look, I am very aware of that. And the Prime Minister and I have had a number of conversations about it already. And I have been speaking to a lot of Canadians about this, as has the Prime Minister. Just last night, I had a good conversation with Dan Kelly about it. It's one of the reasons that our first act was putting in place these vaccine mandates, because we really have to finish the fight against COVID, and vaccines are the way to do it. Having said that, we are aware of a couple of things. One is that the fourth wave and the Delta variant are hitting parts of the country particularly hard, and we know that government policy very much needs to be mindful of that, and we are going to be there for Canadians across the country in this fight against COVID. And we are providing support to the healthcare systems in the hardest hit provinces, and we will provide economic support as needed, and we're working on that. And then we're also aware, as we committed to during the campaign, that while some sectors of the economy are recovering very robustly, and that is great, there are some sectors that have been and continue to be particularly hard hit. You know, tourism and events are some examples. And so we are working on ways to ensure that support is there for them. So we'll have more to say about the specifics soon.
But again, it comes down to the bottom line of the promise that we made at the beginning of this pandemic, to have Canadians' backs as much as it took, as long as it took. Not just because that's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do to ensure that our economy is bouncing back, to make sure that businesses can thrive once again quickly, to make sure that we have the opportunities to keep people safe, to get back to normal, and to grow our economies. And that's what we're going to focus on doing, and that's what we'll have more to say on in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Prime Minister. That concludes the press conference.